Welcome back to the fourth installment of the Capital Conversation podcast. I'm Owen, that's James, and today we're going to be talking about the latest in the impeachment inquiry against President Trump, unrest in the Kamala Harris campaign, and growing discontent amongst senators with Mitch McConnell's leadership.
So first, touching on impeachment, Jerry Nadler, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, formally invited Trump and his counsel to attend the next committee impeachment hearings starting on December 4th, in which they're going to invite constitutional scholars to come in and discuss historical impeachment precedent, the definition of an impeachable offense, and whether Trump's actions meet the threshold to be impeached, which are defined as high crimes and misdemeanors. So the administration doesn't quite know how to feel about this. There's two ways to look at it. The first being that Trump sort of has a chance to represent himself to the country and present his public defense. But in doing that, he acknowledges that he's done something wrong, and he gives legitimacy to the inquiry at all. And then the other side of that would be not go and deflect that anything wrong happened at all, and that's sort of the stance they've been taking all along.
I think a lot of Democrats have grown frustrated with the fact that they haven't been able to move the needle in terms of public opinion in the way that they wanted to, and so they're certainly feeling pressure on these upcoming judiciary hearings in terms of this is really their last opportunity to get that bump in public support that they really need to get to that kind of 60%. I think is the unwritten threshold that we've seen as being what they really need in order to push some of these Republican senators to really come to terms with whether or not they're going to vote to remove Trump from office. But they've expressed doubt, at least many of them have, that they can actually meet that threshold. They have this quote from Representative David Cicilline from Rhode Island, and he said, "I think people have made up their minds on this in a lot of ways, but I think frankly what should drive us is the evidence and the facts and our oath of office." So he's recognizing that, they're pretty much stuck at what they're at, which is hovering around 50% versus 41 or 42% against. But, they genuinely believe that he did something wrong and that the evidence is there. And so, they're going to keep going. They're going to see this process through to the end, but they're, expressing doubt that they really can actually get him removed.
Yeah, and the Trump administration is afraid that by going and sending counsel to these hearings, that they're sort of legitimizing it. And then Americans would say, well, if he's defending himself now, whereas he's refused to send anyone to these before, maybe he's acknowledging that there's something going on here, and then they might revisit it. So within the administration, they're trying to say, all right, is now the time where I continue to deflect and say, this never happened, it didn't happen, it was never a thing, and I'm not going to treat it as such? Or is this the moment where they sort of put their foot down and acknowledge something bad happened and defend it? And I think most people can agree it's in their best interests to have someone there to present Trump's side to the public, because eventually it's going to go to the Senate and we're going to have a trial. But
they need to be able to do it in a sophisticated, legal manner and speak eloquently, and that's not really something that you want to just leave in the hands of President Trump. So I think definitely would be wise for him to have someone that's experienced and well-versed in this sort of situation to, help him and guide him through the process. But the Republicans' defense strategy has kind of been all over the place lately. I mean, they've been calling for Adam Schiff to testify in the judiciary hearings, and they've also been putting a lot of increased pressure on trying to get Hunter Biden in front of the impeachment probe. But I mean, I think you and I can both agree that neither one of these defenses really is going to help the Republicans that much, because no matter how corrupt or not corrupt Hunter Biden is, it has no bearing on whether or not Trump abused his power by withholding the aid.
Yeah, even if Hunter did something wrong, it's still outside of Trump's bounds to withhold the aid and ask the Ukrainians to investigate it, and that's the crux of all this. Not whether he did something wrong.
And they want Schiff to come and testify, speaking about the whistleblower and the fact that he does or does not know his identity. I mean, we really don't know at this point, because we've heard different stories from different sides. But the Republicans very firmly believe that this whistleblower is a partisan figure that's acting against President Trump because of his democratic beliefs. And whether or not they're able to get that information out of Adam Schiff, is not really going to help them, because you have White House officials and intelligence officials that have came out and spoken against the actions that President Trump did, including Gordon Sondland, ambassador to the EU, someone that was very much a Trump guy. So at this point, the evidence against him is what it is, and they're not going to change that. They need to argue at this point that it's not something that meets the threshold for being a high crime and misdemeanor, not that this is a witch hunt, because at this point, based off the testimony we've heard, I mean, that's not really something that you can say.
Well, they want to make it as partisan as possible. If they can make it seem like this is, again, a witch hunt like they did in the Mueller investigation, and can convince the American public of that, then Trump probably gets reelected. And another murmurs from the administration are that they're kind of upset that they got this invitation, because one of Trump's big points throughout all of this has been, it's an illegitimate process. I haven't been involved. I've never had a chance to defend myself.
The fact that they're giving him the opportunity to defend himself, it takes another
because he doesn't want to defend himself.
Right, it takes another argument and talking point away from President Trump, and saying that this is just an attack on me, a smear campaign, when they're going through the process the right way. They took an argument away from him by formally voting to open the inquiry, passed it through the House, and now they're taking another argument away from him by allowing him to testify.
Yeah, so Democrats are thrilled that now they're invited him at all, because if he shows up, then he's admitting it's legitimate. If he doesn't, then he doesn't lose as much ground. But at the same time, he's also, again, it disarms him of the fact that it's a legitimate process and he's having a chance. And that's one of his, that's his biggest sort of rebuttal at this point, besides Hunter did something wrong, so what I did's okay, and it's been illegitimate, and the whole thing's a witch hunt. But if they give him a chance to partake and he denies it, then that goes out the window. And now
none of these are particularly strong defenses that he's had thus far.
Yeah.
But the question is whether you can convince the public, and even the most positively minded Democratic officials have recognized, like the Representative Yarmouth from Kentucky said that he thinks that they could push the needle in terms of public opinion 4 or 5 percentage points after the judiciary hearings, but he thinks that it's never going to get to the point where it exceeds 60%. So while he's recognizing that they could make some significant ground in public opinion in this next week, he doesn't think that they ever have the opportunity to get it to 60%. So then the question is 55% enough to get the 17 Republican senators that it requires to remove him from office to...
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, is they need... The reason public opinion matters so much is if it gets to such a point that they cannot defend Trump and still have themselves look good, then they have to impeach him. None of them are going to just willingly. Public has to sort of force them into it. And at 60%, they can't go home having impeached Trump and say they did a good thing without their support pushing back on them and them ultimately not getting reelected. So that's why the public opinion matters so much, even though it's not really a public thing at all with regards to actually removing him from office.
Yeah. And another piece of evidence that broke in the Democrats' favor this week in terms of this whole Ukraine aid investigation, Mark Sandy, a senior budget official in the White House, stated in private deposition that 2 budget officials working in the White House resigned because of their frustrations over the fact that the Ukraine aid was being frozen.
Yeah, but again, at the end of the day, we've seen Sondland come out and say it's a quid pro quo, and we've seen all this other evidence against Trump, but at the end of the day, nothing is really going to shift that public opinion anymore. It seems as of now.
It's just another reputable official that's tacking on, but I don't think that even if they put him in front of a public hearing, in front of a camera, that he's going to say anything that really convinces the public one way or the other. So we'll see if maybe, if President Trump testifies publicly, that's something that millions of people probably would tune in to watch President Trump testify, and that's something that, because of the viewership, would have the opportunity to sway public opinion.
I agree.
I don't think that these, not to take anything away from these extremely important officials, but, they don't have the name recognition to the average consumer and follower of politics for them to really tune in, and I don't think that they're getting the viewership necessary for people to educate themselves on what's going on and to really change their mind and their opinion. So they're really just basing it off of do I like the job President Trump is doing? Do I not like the job President Trump is doing? And pretty much, if you like the job he's doing, then you're, in favor of him not being impeached. And if you don't like the job that he's doing, you want him to be impeached. And this whole investigation is kind of irrelevant. It's a placeholder for anything.
Yeah,
is the way I see it.
Yeah, I don't know how much. I mean, people are certainly uneducated about this, but even if they were educated, I don't know how much that would move the needle. Again, just because you're either with him or against him at this point, there's very few people.
It's such a polarized environment.
There's not really many changeable minds out there to be had, and when it comes down to it, it doesn't. In a candid moment, most people would say, I don't really care if he did it or not. I've wanted him gone the day he was inaugurated, or I'm going to stick by him regardless.
That's hurting the Democrats too, is that you have, probably 100, maybe 150 Democratic representatives that have, been seeking to impeach him, like Maxine Waters, since the day that he entered office. And so, those people that felt like the Mueller report was an impeachable thing and stuff like that the public, overwhelmingly was against impeaching him for, I think that it's not helping the Democrats in terms of convincing the public when they've been pro-impeachment on pretty much everything that Trump has done. The public...
Because when Maxine Waters comes out and says, I want to impeach him, it's like, all right, that doesn't give any more merit to this investigation because you wanted to impeach him 15 times already.
So they're questionable about whether or not this is really a big thing because it's like the boy who cried wolf. I mean, if you're crying impeachment over every little misdeed, then how do we know that this is actually a high crime misdemeanor? Yeah. And I think that that's affecting the minds of a lot of the public, and you have to realize like the level of news consumption for the average American following politics is not that high, and so if they're not really fully understanding what exactly happened here, they might be a little skeptical based off the behavior of the Democrats since Trump has been elected.
And I think Trump's done a fantastic job in his own right of flipping the narrative, whether it be the Mueller investigation, whether it be, sort of the shady dealings he's had with other foreign nations throughout his presidency, or even this. He flips it so that it's a witch hunt, and then the Democrats seem to fall right into that. I mean, no one's out there saying, I'm a moderate, but I can see both sides. They just immediately pile onto him and lay into him.
They hate everything that President Trump does, so it helps him to make that witch hunt argument when we haven't really seen any sort of bipartisan meeting in the middle on any kind of legislation or anything of the like in Congress since he took office, but even in the Obama administration to some extent.
Yeah, but I think public opinion might be shifted if throughout his presidency there had been a lot more bipartisan agreement on what he was doing was right or wrong, and then now you see that disappear. I think it would catch people's eyes a little more. But as of now, people are just getting sick of...
Yeah, it's been polarized. Nothing is changing from the polarization. So it makes it a lot harder to impeach when you have two sides that are such firmly planted and on opposite ends.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, I guess moving on to the 2020 election, there was some big news and a scathing article released in the New York Times about Senator Harris's faltering campaign. Her state operations director, Kelly Mellenbacher, resigned on November 30th, and she was complaining about how the staff has been treated in the Senator Harris campaign and how they were laying people off that they had asked to move from Washington, D.C. to other parts of the country, namely Baltimore, Maryland, and then within a couple weeks they laid them off with no notice. She talked about how it doesn't seem like they have a clear direction to win, and about how they're just all around, has not been great communication within the campaign, and that the staffers are not really being given the respect and the good treatment that they deserve for all the hard work that they're doing for Senator Harris. And she's making the point that it starts at the top, and it's really been Harris that is at fault for all the lack of enthusiasm that's around her campaign.
Yeah, and it's twofold because she's saying, one, I was a senior campaign advisor for Harris, and everybody thinks she doesn't have a chance at winning, which hurts her in the polls. And two, she's a jerk to all of her staffers and everyone below
Yeah,
her.
she already has a mean
Yeah,
reputation.
so it's twofold, and it's like we said on last podcast, we were talking about Harris's direction for the future, and we didn't see a way for her to win, and we were like, what's her end goal here? And this kind of just adds fuel to that sort of speculation, like she can't win, what's she doing?
Yeah.
And then beyond the fact that she's a jerk, this is a senior advisor who's again coming out and saying she doesn't have a chance at winning. Like reading that as a consumer, this person has nothing to no allegiance to Harris anymore. So
Right.
getting that level of candor is alarming.
And the Times also mentioned that, out of all the 20 some odd Democratic candidates that we've seen in this primary cycle, none have suffered this sort of path that Harris is on now, where she was a top tier candidate and then had such a hard fall from like the high teens in the polls to down to pretty much in the single digits.
And one of her biggest flaws, I guess you could call it, is the fact that people view her as sort of mean and aggressive and just curt with everyone, and that's can be problematic when you're trying to make a diplomatic relation or whatever.
Yeah.
And this again just
But it's also hard
that.
to vote for somebody like that if they come off as being someone that's like mean and steely-eyed and not a nice person. I mean, people want to vote for somebody that they like, and that's a complaint that a lot of people have had about President Trump, is he's not really a likable guy, and he's gotten attacks about his character and stuff like that. But you're in that same kind of boat with Harris. I mean, a lot of people have heavy reservations about her character and the way that she comes off publicly. So, I don't think that the loss of this advisor sinks her campaign. I think it's underlying of a deeper issue, and we'll see how much longer she decides to continue. But a lot of the reason why she was laying off staffers is because of the lack of funding and the fact that the donations are waning, because her supporters are recognizing that she's not above fifth in a single state from any of the polls that I've seen. So that makes it really, really tough. And I think her supporters are recognizing that, and she's running out of money. And so if she runs out of money, then she's going to have to be out pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that sort of looks bad for her from a broader perspective is she's trying to be the candidate who sticks up for the little guy, whether it be the person of color, whether it be the woman.
Kamala Harris for the people.
Yeah, and now these are ordinary people working for her, and she's rude to them, and she moves them without any notice, and then lays them off. And it's like, how are you supposed to represent me?
Supporting the people, exactly.
Yeah, and these people you actually owe something to. You don't owe anything to me. Why would I be any different? You'll chew me up and spit me out if it gives you any political gain.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just hurts her. I mean, I think this is ultimately, well, I guess I already think her campaign is going downhill, but I think this kind of makes it much more difficult for her to turn it back up. And again, not because this lady was too important, but just because it gives you a peek inside the campaign that hurts her.
And the fact that it's so highly publicized at times is really not something that's ideal for her campaign that already has kind of a negative trend about it.
Yeah.
But the other interesting point with Mellenbacher specifically is she immediately took a job within former Mayor Bloomberg's campaign, and a lot of the concerns that people had outlined in terms of his viability in 2020 and stuff like that was that his late entrance into the race has caused for him to miss out on the hiring of all the top staffers that are around to work and manage campaigns in the Democratic primary. So with him getting somebody that was highly valued within the Harris campaign and being able to take her away from Harris and plug her right into his campaign, if he's able to do that with faltering candidates that are in the primary right now, continue to take quality staffers from them, then I think that alleviates that concern and will be a bump in his campaign.
Maybe her leaving Harris's campaign to go to Bloomberg's campaign will inspire someone else who's like, hey, I'm dissatisfied with who I'm working for too. Maybe I can do the same thing. I mean, you could see sort of a domino effect going there.
Right, and also, if we have someone like Booker or something like that drop out of the race, but also, Bloomberg being someone uniquely that's self-funded and has plenty of resources monetarily, he can poach people that are in campaigns like Klobuchar's and Booker's that are beginning to falter because of lack of donations.
Yeah.
Just on a resource level, that he has more money and more funding, and he can afford to pay these high-level staffers. And I still think it's a tough path. He's going to have to take a good chunk of Biden's base, but if he can get good management, he definitely has the funding and the capability to get his message across in a way that not every candidate on the stage can. He certainly has the experience and was very, very well liked in his one political office that he held in New York as mayor. There's a possibility, it's an outside possibility, but there's a possibility that he gains traction and becomes a serious contender. I mean, he certainly could take Buttigieg's base as someone that, both the similarly minded politically, former mayors, former or current mayors, but he has way more experience than Buttigieg. And Buttigieg started right around where Bloomberg is polling right now, that 4 or 5% range, and then just kind of propelled as people got sick of the super progressive Harris or Sanders and Warren message, and started to propel to his campaign. So you could just see a quiet little jump up in the polls like that for Bloomberg.
Well, one of the biggest knocks on Buttigieg is he doesn't have the experience. He's young. This is his first real shot, and maybe people who support Buttigieg on policy but think he's not quite ready or seasoned enough to assume the presidency could see Bloomberg as a more viable option. And of course there's Joe Biden, but I think a lot of people have reservations about his I don't know how to say it, but he just says things and acts in off-color ways that turn people off, and I think Bloomberg comes across as a much
Bloomberg comes across as a very, very well-spoken and polished individual, and so he can take those voters that are concerned about Buttigieg's experience. He can take African American voters that are turned off by Buttigieg, who is polling very, very low with African Americans, and those people that are concerned, like, I like Biden, I like his policy, but I'm really, really concerned about, him talking, like putting him on the stage next to President Trump or something like that the American people don't want to vote for someone that comes off as a gaffe machine. People that are concerned about that could turn to Bloomberg. So, I really think that the only thing he has working against him is the big stigma that the Democrats have right now in their party, and especially in this primary, about billionaires.
Yeah, that's true. You do see the whole party is, or even like Bernie Sanders, who's now a millionaire, which is ironic, but his whole thing is, we're going to fund these new programs, but using the money of millionaires and billionaires, and you've got Bloomberg running, and it's, how do I vote for somebody who's going to support the common man if he's a billionaire? It is sort of hard to sort of reconcile that as a voter, but at the same time, if he supports what he says he does and actually acts it out, I don't think it would be detrimental to him, but it certainly is an obstacle.
Well, he's going to get hit. Warren's built her entire campaign against basically attacking billionaires, and so he's going to get hit hard just for being who he is as a billionaire, as the 14th richest person on earth by Senator Warren, and so, that's going to be a difficult obstacle to overcome, given the fact that she's very well supported in pretty much every state within the Democratic primary, and very well supported nationally. He could do it, but that's definitely an obstacle.
I think one of the issues he's going to have pulling away from the bases of Buttigieg and Biden, people that might support him, is that they already feel allegiance to one of those two. But when, again, the more faltering moderate candidates like Amy Klobuchar drop off, at that point, those voters might shift over to him in a way that somebody who's already made donations to another candidate wouldn't. So
and plus, there was that poll last week that said, I believe it was 23 or 25% of Buttigieg voters had decided that they were voting for him. So that's still 75% of Buttigieg voters that, if you ask them today in a poll, they're going to pick Buttigieg, but they're open to being swayed.
Yeah.
And the highest person in the primary in that poll was Biden. He had 49% of his supporters were decided, but that still leaves a majority at 51% that could flee Biden's campaign and go elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think what's scary if you're a Biden or a Buttigieg looking at Bloomberg is, I've been in the race for months, everybody sort of knows me and my message, but he's new.
New voice.
Yeah, so maybe while I'm not going to say anything that's going to attract new voters, once his message gets out and he gets, discovered, for lack of a better word, I think there's a real fear that voters will jump ship and go over to him. Whereas that really can't happen for anyone else in the race at this point,
Yeah,
just because he's so new.
if they didn't view him as a threat, there would not have been the attacks that came out immediately when he joined the race, and the attacks of his $31 million ad buy for this upcoming week by Warren and Sanders specifically, but even Biden criticized him for entering the race. And, one thing I read to alleviate the concerns about dealing with Warren and Sanders and their criticisms of his billionaire status is Bloomberg refuses any political donations from anyone to his campaign. So the fact that you need 200,000 donors to be eligible for the upcoming Democratic debate, he only has one donor, that's himself, and so he won't be eligible just based off that rule unless the DNC changes their policy. And so they were, what I was reading was it might be a wise strategy for him to, allow this to happen and to just stay away from the debates, because it doesn't open him up to the public criticism on a national stage, sitting there standing against Sanders and Warren, tag teaming him, and he has plenty of resources to get his message out, either through ad buys or, traveling around. He was recently in Norfolk giving a campaign event and just talking directly to the people without someone attacking his message. And plus, the audience has definitely dwindled of these debates of late, and they don't really give you much opportunity to actually speak about what you're passionate about. You only really get sound bites, and so his campaign came out and said we're going to follow the DNC rules. We're not going to push it if they don't want to change the rule. We're not asking them to change the rule. We'll do whatever they say, and if we're allowed to debate, we will. If we're not, we're not going to. So they don't seem that beat up about it. And they recognize that there are other avenues that are probably more beneficial to them getting their message out.
Well, and like you said, Bloomberg might not even want to debate, and this sort of gives him an out for not doing it, so that Warren and Sanders can't get up there and say he's scared to debate us or he doesn't want to debate us. And that might be true. It does open him up to a lot of criticism that he probably doesn't want, but he has that, I wanted to, but I couldn't, and I think people will find that appealing in that he's not dodging them, and he's willing to engage in a debate with them, but he just can't. And I think that's important, just from looking at his image as someone who projects more strength and not, I'm afraid to get on a stage because he has the out.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so on to our last topic of the day, a bipartisan bill that has White House support and support from several Republican senators and the vast majority of the Democratic body in Congress, a bill by Chuck Grassley, a Republican senator from Iowa, and Ron Wyden, a Democratic senator from Oregon, that's intended to cap drug prices for senior citizens under the Medicare program, and also penalize companies for large increases in drug prices, has been stalled recently by Chuck Grassley, or by Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and it's fed a lot of frustrations from Republicans or from Democrats and even some Republicans over what the recent policy has been under Mitch McConnell's Senate Majority Leadership. 300 bills have been sent to the Senate by the House in this Congress alone, but only 98 votes have been held by the Senate during this Congress on legislation compared to 268 votes on nominations. So, while McConnell has feathered his cap by saying that he's the Grim Reaper on socialist legislation that's been tried to be promoted by that AOC coalition in the Democratic majority House of Representatives, he's gone even further, and he's curbed a lot of Republican bills as well. There was a bill about preventing violence against women that was stomped in the Senate, and it was partially co-signed by Joni Ernst, who's another Republican senator from Iowa. So there's been plenty of bills like those two that have had bipartisan support and then have been unable to be passed because of the policies that Mitch McConnell has promoted. And it seems like he hasn't really wanted to take on any tough issues. He wants to get the judicial nominees through, and he wants to pass the things that
Yeah,
he can
Republicans are
pass
easily
with
pass.
with a unanimous Republican support, but he doesn't really want to split up the caucus and make it something where the Republicans have to choose, do I want to go for this or not, make them have tough decisions. He's really just looked for straightforward choices, and that's frustrated a lot of senators. Dick Durbin, who's a Democratic senator from Illinois, was complaining about the structure of what the Senate has been recently, and he said, I've said to people here, if you've been here for 4 years or less, you've never seen the Senate. And you would have loved it. It was an interesting place. We had bills and amendments. We did big things. So he's basically saying that the Senate has become a shell of its former self, and they no longer do the things that a Senate is supposed to do. It's basically became a stalemate, and nothing really happens there, and that's became really frustrating to him.
Yeah, and McConnell's big thing is he doesn't want to divide Republicans, but I think what's drawn attention to this is Donald Trump actually came out and supported
This bill,
this
right.
bill that McConnell refused to put on. So now, while he's trying to prevent Republicans having to choose and go down that line because he wants to maintain a united front, he now has the president and the majority leader sort of opposing each other, which is an even bigger deal.
Yeah, and
than
we
what
saw
he
this on
wanted.
the guns too.
Yeah.
And, in the aftermath of one of those mass shootings, was Trump wanted to put forward a bill on background checks, and he was hoping that McConnell would play ball, and we waited, and it never actually came to fruition because he doesn't want to force Republicans to decide whether they're going to side with, the White House, the bipartisan bill, or with the NRA.
Yeah.
He recognizes it would create a tough decision between Republicans, and so he's refused to put forth bills that are going to do such. But
And this comes at a time where Donald Trump needs Senate Republicans to back him more than ever, because if he's in contrast with the Senate at this point, then it opens the door even more so for a senator to say, this is the last straw, I'm voting to impeach you. So it comes at an interesting time where
Yeah.
you're seeing the
but
president.
it's the policy has certainly frustrated some Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, Grassley expressed his frustrations, and so has Lamar Alexander, who's another Republican senator from Tennessee. He said, I think sooner or later people are going to say, we'd like to do more than confirm judges and talk about impeachment in the Senate. And, he has a point, and Grassley said similar, speaking on this bill specifically. He mentioned that, this is a problem in 50 states. It has bipartisan support. This is something that the people want, that the White House supports, and you have 22 Republican senators that are up for re-election in this 2020 election cycle. It's a problem in all 50 states, and so eventually they're going to have to come to terms with the fact that, something needs to be done on these issues, and it just simply is not happening.
Yeah,
So,
and Grassley is respected and highly regarded in the Republican Party.
yeah, he's one of the most senior
Yeah,
Republican
so
senators.
coming from him, this
He
might carry a
chairs the
little more
Finance
weight.
Committee.
Yeah, so maybe him saying it and bringing this to light, and I think we're already seeing that just in the coverage it's gotten, because this has been sort of a brewing thing for a while now, but once Grassley speaks on it, it sort of gets more attention, and
Well,
you can hope that this is sort of the final straw. And I think McConnell has a right to some extent to decide what's voted on and what's not, because some of what he's sort of shut down is just silly.
Well, it's absolutely within his power as, Senate Majority Leader, and I'm not saying that all 300 of those bills passed by the House and sent to the Senate have the merits required to actually be signed into law, but I think people are being frustrated in the sense that it is the job of the Senate to actually have the guts to take up legislation and to pass legislation that helps the American people or is necessary for the American people. And something like drug prices or violence against women, these are important issues that, legislation is needed on. And
Yeah, and maybe part of this is because McConnell is in a safe district. He doesn't, he's going to get reelected regardless of whether he puts this on the floor or not, so he doesn't feel that pressure, whereas a lot of other Senate Republicans do, and there's nothing they can do about it, which is all the more frustrating for them.
yeah, well, it raises a lot of concerns about the structure of the U.S. Senate
Yeah.
as it is right
Well,
now.
and it's important to note that Majority Leader isn't in the Constitution at all.
Right, but
It's just
the
kind
fact
of
that
a-
we've given one man the power to decide, even if 99, the rest of the senators support the bill, he has the power to decide that the bill is not going to be voted on unless, this bill would pass today. It has the support from enough Republicans in the Senate and all of the Democrats in the Senate that the bill would pass, but it needs to be brought to the table. And I think we've seen several of those in this past year where that's been the case, but
Yeah, and
nothing's
it wasn't
been done.
much of an issue before this last session because all the majority leaders prior had sort of shut down stuff going into the Senate before, but at the same time it hadn't been to this extent. I mean, anything that comes that might fracture Republicans, he's not even putting on the floor. So I think it's just, again, the extent to which he's using this power that has brought the whole thing into question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty there that, needs to be voted on, and he's just blatantly saying, like, I'm the boss, and, I'm going to do what I see fit. And I think a lot of people are getting frustrated with that, but in terms of, like, what is the next step, or, how the repercussions go for something like this, it's hard to see. I mean, I can't imagine Mitch McConnell not getting reelected as majority leader by Republicans in 2020, and despite the fact that there are 22 Republicans up for re-election in 2020, based on the maps, it's hard to imagine them losing control of the Senate. I think worst case scenario for them would be a 50-50 split, and then if they lost the presidency, then the Democratic vice president would be the tie-breaking vote, and to give the Democrats
I don't even
the majority.
see a 50-50 really happening. I think Republicans are going to maintain control. I mean, they're going to get that seat in Alabama back unless something, absolutely crazy happens
Right,
for one.
so they'd have to lose 4 seats.
Yeah, and I guess it could happen, but I don't know. I think they're going to
Arizona
have a
and Colorado, with Cory Gardner and Martha McSally filling McCain's seat, those are going to be tough gets. They'll probably go Democrat. But Susan Collins in Maine, despite the fact that Maine's a blue state, she has a ton of support. People love her in Maine. Her approval rating is 68, 70%. I can't imagine her not getting reelected. There isn't really a strong candidate opposing her. You got Thom Tillis in North Carolina. Again, North Carolina's trending purple, but I think he hangs on through this election cycle. John Cornyn in Texas is the same deal as North Carolina, trending purple, but I can't imagine him losing it in this election cycle. Maybe 2024, Texas and North Carolina become toss-up states, but even then I have a hard time imagining it. Certainly not in 2020. I think close race, but Cornyn has a lot higher likability ratings than Ted Cruz does, so if Ted Cruz was able to hang on against a strong campaign by Beto O'Rourke, then I don't think Cornyn loses a seat. I don't think Tillis loses a seat. So I think the way I see it right now, if I had to predict it, I'd say it's Democrats +1, which would leave it at 52-48 in favor of Republicans.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good estimate. And again, like you said, those states are trending purple, Texas and North Carolina, but it's not going to be in the next election cycle. And it might not even be in the next election cycle. But at some point, I think you will see a Democrat win some Senate seats in those
depending on who the Democrat is, you definitely could see them mounting a strong campaign. I think that was the one thing that was working against O'Rourke, was how liberal he is made it tough to win in a state like Texas. I mean, he made it a close race, but he had a ton of money for his campaign. So and even if the Republicans lose in Arizona and in Colorado, they still could break even because there's a strong Senate campaign being mounted by John James in Michigan, who's a businessman, entrepreneur, who ran against Debbie Stabenow in 2018 in the midterms, and he lost by about 3%, and he's running again against the other Michigan senator in this 2020 election cycle. But I think the fact that it's a presidential election year, the turnout is going to be a lot higher. Trump is putting a lot of attention into Michigan because he won there in 2016 and really needs to hold it in 2020 to hold on to his office. I think that will help James, who is an African-American Republican, young guy, very energizing, and he's got a chance to make that race a toss-up race, given that he only lost by 3% in a low turnout.
Yeah, and when you add that into the fact that they're going to get out, I can't see a situation.
Alabama's a virtual certainty as long as they nominate a candidate. They got to nominate somebody that doesn't have any baggage, and they're fine.
And when you take that in conjunction with James and Michigan, I don't see a situation in which they lose a majority in the Senate.
I think the most likely scenario is it's Democrats +1. There's an outside chance that it's even, 2 losses, 2 pickups for Republicans, and there's another outside chance the other way that it's Democrats pick up 3, lose 1, with Collins losing in Maine. But I mean, she's the most likely out of Corin, Tillis, and herself to lose. But
Yeah.
I would be really shocked if she lost her seat. And the Democrats would need to win all 3 of those, plus hold Alabama, in order for it to even be 50-50.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, especially going into the next presidential election. Thanks for being with us today, and we hope to see you next time on the 5th installment. Thank you.